Every ranger in my district follows one rule. If the forest ever goes completely silent, you leave immediately. No investigation. No radio calls. No questions. Just get in your truck and drive until you hear the forest breathing again. I learned why that rule exists during my first week assigned to the North District. The roads were narrow gravel loops that wound through pine and wet soil. My patrol truck smelled like heater dust and old vinyl. The dashboard lights glowed soft green. The radio gave a steady low hiss that made the cab feel occupied. Night patrol followed a rhythm that settled the mind. Gate check. Trailhead board check. Weather notes in the logbook. I liked the routine. It gave shape to the darkness. When the engine idled, the heater pushed warm air against my boots. Outside, the cold forest breathed slowly and steadily. Most sounds carried far at that hour. Crickets stitched the dark together. An owl called from somewhere uphill. Wind brushed the needles high above the road. Those sounds worked like markers. They told you distance. They told you the forest was behaving the way forests should. The station sat 10 miles south beside a narrow river. One building. One radio mast. A gravel yard where trucks cooled after patrol. Inside, it smelled like paper maps and coffee that had burned too long. The place felt small in a good way. Like a pocket of order pressed into a wide piece of wilderness. My truck carried the small things that kept a ranger steady. Flashlight in the door pocket. Paper map folded thin. Compass clipped to my vest. Whistle on a short cord. The objects were simple but dependable. When the woods stretched black beyond the headlights, those little tools reminded me the job still followed rules. I learned the roads by repetition. Mile marker 12 meant a bend near the creek. Marker 14 meant a broken signpost that leaned toward the ditch. By the end of the week, my hands drove the wheel without thinking. My mind listened instead. Some rangers liked music on patrol. I never did. The radio static felt better. It left room for the forest. If something changed, you could hear it sooner. A branch snapping. Tires on gravel. Even a deer stepping through brush carried a small rhythm you learned to trust. That first week I felt calm. Nothing dramatic happened. Just miles of road and trees breathing in the dark. I remember thinking the job might be easier than people said. The truck heater hummed while frost formed on the outer edges of the windshield. I kept one glove off so I could feel the steering wheel. Cold leather. Solid grip. The radio hiss moved in slow waves. In that moment, the forest sounded alive and distant and predictable. I remember the comfort of that sound more than anything. Crickets. Wind. Tires rolling over pale gravel. The forest never felt empty. If you worked long enough, you learned each sound had meaning. Movement meant life. Life meant balance. And balance meant safety for a ranger driving alone under tall trees. That was what I believed during my first patrol week. The forest spoke constantly, and I trusted that voice. I did not know yet how wrong that comfort could be. I had not heard the forest stop. And when it finally did, the silence would feel heavier than any sound the woods had ever made. I would learn that lesson very soon after that. The lesson came 3 nights after my first patrol loop. I was sitting in the station office with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The heater clicked on and off beside the map wall. Outside, the gravel yard held the last light of evening. 3 other species were finishing their reports. Paper moved across the desk. A radio muttered softly from the charging rack. It was the kind of quiet that felt normal. The kind you stop noticing after a few minutes. I remember Ranger Ellis leaning back in his chair. He had been in the district longer than anyone else. His jacket smelled faintly of wood smoke and pine sap. The man spoke slow. The kind of voice that made people listen without asking why. He slid a clipboard across the desk toward me. "Night patrol rules," he said. I looked over the page. Most of it was routine. Gate locks. Fire watch during dry months. Wildlife distance guidelines. The same procedures every ranger learns in training. Near the bottom of the page there was a single line written in block letters. If the forest goes silent, leave. No punctuation. No explanation. I looked up at him. What does that mean exactly? Ellis didn't answer right away. He took a sip from his mug and stared out the office window. The last of the light had slipped behind the tree line. The radio on the shelf gave a small burst of static. Means what it says, he replied. One of the other rangers stopped writing for a moment. Just a small pause in his pen movement. Then he went back to his report without speaking. I waited for Ellis to continue. Sometimes older rangers like to scare new transfers with camp stories. I thought maybe this was one of those moments. But no one in the room smiled. Ellis leaned forward and tapped the paper once with his finger. If the forest goes silent, you leave, he said again. You don't investigate. You don't stand there listening. You get in the truck and drive out. The heater hummed against the wall. The room smelled like dust warming on metal. I tried to laugh it off. Animals go quiet sometimes, I said. Weather shifts. Predator moving through. Ellis nodded once. Sometimes, he said. His voice stayed calm. Not dramatic. Just certain. Then how do you know when it matters? For the first time he looked directly at me. You'll know. The ranger at the far desk cleared his throat. Not loud. Just enough to break the stillness that had crept into the room. Someone turned the radio volume down a notch. His softened. Ellis pushed the clipboard closer to me. Sign the sheet, he said. I signed it. The rules sat there on the page after my name. Simple words. Nothing strange about them. But the room had shifted in a way I could not quite explain. No one joked about it. No one told a story to lighten the mood. They just went back to their work. A few minutes later Ellis stood up and grabbed his patrol keys. The metal ring clinked softly against the desk. He paused at the door before stepping outside. One more thing, he said without turning around. If it happens, don't use the radio. Then he walked out into the dark yard. The door closed behind him with a hollow metal sound. After that conversation, the office returned to normal work. Pens moved across paper again. Someone poured fresh coffee into a chipped mug. The radio has settled back into the background like distant wind. But the line on that sheet stayed in my head. If the forest goes silent, leave. I tried to treat it like any other safety rule. Rangers live by them. Fire distance. Wildlife space. Weather limits. Rules keep small problems from becoming big ones. Still, that sentence felt different. It had no numbers. No explanation. Just a warning written like a fact that everyone already understood. Later that night I stepped outside to start my patrol. Cold air moved through the yard. The smell of damp pine drifted down from the trees beyond the station lights. My truck waited near the fence line. The door gave its usual heavy thud when I opened it. Inside the cab, the familiar smell of dust and old vinyl greeted me. I sat down and let the heater begin its slow, warm breath. The dashboard lights glowed soft green again. Calm and steady. I always checked the same items before driving. Flashlight first. It rested in the door pocket where my hand could reach it without looking. I clicked the switch once. Warm beam. Strong battery. Next, the compass clipped to my vest. The needle swung once, then settled north. A small, quiet motion that meant the world still followed its normal rules. My whistle hung from a short cord beside it. I touched the metal surface with my thumb. Cold. Solid. Then the paper map. I kept it folded along the same creases every night. Grease pencil marks traced the roads and trailheads. Familiar lines that turned miles of forest into something readable. The last object was the radio. It sat in the center console beside the gear shift. I lifted it and pressed the test button. A small burst of static filled the cab. Dispatch answered with a short acknowledgement. Their voices sounded distant but human. That was enough. These things were simple, but they mattered more than people realized. When you work alone in the dark, small objects become anchors. Points of control in a place too wide to manage completely. I started the engine and pulled out of the yard. The tires rolled over loose gravel. Headlights cut two pale tunnels through the trees. Beyond that light, the forest stayed deep and patient. I drove the first mile with the window cracked open. Cool air moved across my face. Crickets filled the roadside grass with steady noise. That sound always helped. Noise meant life. Life meant movement. Movement meant the forest was behaving the way it should. My hand rested lightly on the steering wheel, while the truck followed the curve of the road. The heater warmed my boots. The radio hissed quietly beside me. Everything felt grounded. The rule from the office seemed almost unnecessary now. Just another line on a clipboard. The forest spoke constantly around the truck. Wind touched the high branches. An owl called somewhere behind the ridge. Gravel clicked beneath the tires. Each sound layered over the next until the dark felt textured and alive. I remember thinking that silence in a place like this would be impossible. The woods were simply too full of living things. That belief stayed with me as I turned onto the old loop road and continued my patrol deeper into the district. At that moment, the forest still sounded exactly the way a forest should. The road curved deeper into the district. Gravel thinned into packed dirt where old maintenance trucks had worn the surface flat over years of patrols. My headlights pushed forward through tall pine trunks. The beams cut narrow white paths that shifted each time the wheel turned. The forest felt ordinary that night. Crickets worked steadily in the grass beside the road. A barred owl called from somewhere uphill. The wind moved through the needles high above and carried a slow whisper down to the ground. Those sounds formed a pattern I had already started to trust. I checked the first campground gate. The metal latch clanged once when I lifted it and dropped it again. Locked and secure. The sound echoed briefly through the trees, then faded into the wider forest noise. My flashlight beam crossed the empty parking area. A few fallen leaves moved across the gravel in the wind. Nothing unusual. Back in the truck, the heater hummed. Warm air reached my knees while the rest of the cab stayed cool. I sipped from my thermos. The coffee tasted bitter, but it kept the night steady. The radio remained quiet except for a soft wave of static now and then. Dispatch had nothing to report. Miles passed that way. Road. Trees. Gravel. Sound. I noticed how the forest arranged distance through noise. Close insects sounded sharp and fast. Distant owls stretched their calls across long spaces. Wind moved differently depending on how far the hills were from the road. You could feel the shape of the land through sound alone. That was one of the things training never really explained. You learned it by driving slow patrol loops in the dark. The forest told you where you were. When the sounds stayed balanced, you knew everything was normal. I turned toward the creek crossing near marker 12. Water moved under the wooden bridge with a quiet rush. Frogs answered each other from the reeds along the bank. For a moment I switched the headlights off. The forest closed around the truck instantly. The cab lights stayed dim, but the outside world dropped into thick darkness that pressed against the windows. I listened. Crickets. Water. Wind. An owl far to the west. It was a full sound. Busy. Alive. I switched the headlights back on and drove across the bridge. The tires gave a hollow rumble against the wooden planks. Beyond the creek, the road climbed gently through older trees. Their trunks stood thicker and closer together. The canopy above them blocked most of the moonlight. Even so, the forest kept speaking. Something small moved through the brush near the ditch. Probably a rabbit or a raccoon. The sound was quick and light. I followed the road around a wide bend and slowed near marker 14. A broken sign leaned toward the shoulder where someone had clipped it months ago. Another familiar landmark. I remember glancing at the radio, then at the map folded beside the seat. Everything about the patrol felt routine. The heater continued its quiet breath. The steering wheel stayed firm beneath my hands. The forest noise flowed around the truck in a steady blanket. Nothing about that moment suggested danger. But a few minutes later I would begin to understand why that rule existed. Because when the forest finally stopped speaking, the change would be so sudden and complete that it felt less like quiet and more like something had reached into the woods and switched the entire world off. A few minutes after marker 14, the road dipped toward a narrow stretch of low ground. A creek moved somewhere beyond the trees. I could not see the water from the road, but I could hear it sliding slowly over stone. The forest still sounded healthy. Crickets filled the grass beside the ditch. Wind brushed the tops of the pines. My tires moved through the dirt with a soft, steady crunch. Even the truck engine carried a low, calm rhythm. Then the sound changed. Not all at once. First, the crickets stopped. It happened so quietly that my brain did not notice it right away. The steady background noise simply faded, like someone turning a dial down little by little. I kept driving. The wind moved again through the trees, and for a second I thought everything was normal. But the air felt different. The space outside the headlights seemed wider. A few seconds later the wind stopped too. The tall pine branches froze in place above the road. The whisper of needles vanished. Now only the truck engine remained. The road curved beside the creek bank. My headlights stretched across damp soil and thick brush. I slowed slightly without realizing it. Something in my body had already reacted. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds. Not peaceful silence. Not the kind you find inside a building late at night. This silence felt hollow. Like the forest had stepped back and left a space behind. Then the crickets came back. All at once. Their noise rushed and so fast it almost sounded mechanical. Like a switch had flipped somewhere in the dark grass. The wind returned a moment later. Pine needles brushed each other again above the road. I let out a slow breath I had not realized I was holding. The forest was alive again. My hand stayed on the wheel while the truck rolled forward another 100 yards. The heater hummed against my boots. The radio gave a small crackle of static. Everything looked normal. I told myself it had been nothing. Temperature shifts can quiet insects for a moment. A passing predator might freeze smaller animals in place. Forest sound is always changing in small ways. Still, my shoulders felt tight. I slowed the truck near the next bend and opened the window a little wider. Cold air slid into the cab. I listened carefully. Crickets. Wind. Water is moving through the creek bed. The forest sounded full again. I almost laughed at myself. That rule from the station had worked its way into my head. A simple line on a sheet of paper had turned a few seconds of quiet into something bigger than it was. I closed the window halfway and reached for my thermos. The road climbed away from the creek and curved through a patch of older pines. Their trunks stood tall and straight along the shoulder. Normal forest. Normal sounds. But as I drove, I noticed my eyes moving toward the trees more often than before. Not searching exactly. Just checking. Because for those few seconds down near the creek something in the forest had gone missing. And even though the sound had returned, the memory of that empty space stayed with me as the patrol road carried the truck deeper into the district. The patrol ended close to midnight. I parked the truck in the gravel yard behind the station. The engine ticked softly while it cooled. Pine trees stood dark beyond the fence line. Their tops moved slowly in the night wind. Inside the station the lights felt warmer than usual. The office heater pushed dry air across the room. Paper maps hung along the wall beside a large cork board filled with trail notices. The smell of old coffee lingered near the desk. I sat down with the patrol log. Most entries were simple. Gate secured. Trail clear. No wildlife hazards. The same lines are written in slightly different handwriting night after night. I added my notes from the loop road and the creek crossing. Just routine observations. Then I noticed something in the older pages. A phrase repeated several times across different months. Forest went quiet near creek. Left area immediately. Another entry farther back used different words. Sudden silence along ridge trail. Return to vehicle. None of the reports explained the event. They only described the reaction. Each ranger had left the area right away. I flipped another page. A short entry caught my eye. Hiker reported woods went silent before losing trail. The ranger who wrote it had underlined the sentence once. Not heavily. Just enough to show hesitation. The next line simply said subject recovered at trailhead. No other explanation. I leaned back in the chair. The heater clicked off for a moment. The room settled into a still quiet that felt heavier than before. My fingers moved across the pages again. Dogs refusing to enter trail past marker 16. 2 campers reported, no sound, for several minutes near the North Ridge. Both groups left before investigation. The reports were careful. No one used dramatic language. No one claimed to see anything strange. They only described the silence. I sat there for several minutes reading. Outside, a truck passed along the distant highway. Its tires hummed faintly through the trees. The sound faded slowly until only the station heater remained. I turned to another page. One older report stood out from the rest. The handwriting belonged to Ellis. The note was short. Forest silent for approximately 30 seconds. Area abandoned Perul. The final line read, radio not used. That detail made me pause. I looked toward the radio unit on the shelf beside the door. Its small screen glowed blue in the dim office light. The device looked harmless. Just another tool. Still, the line in the report stayed with me. Radio not used. I closed the logbook and rested my hands on the desk. The silence from the creek crossing earlier that night came back to mind. The way the crickets had stopped. The way the wind had disappeared all at once. For a few seconds the forest had felt empty. Not quite. Empty. The heater started again with a low hum. Warm air drifted across the floor. I glanced at the clock above the map wall. 12:17 a.m. Plenty of nights left for patrols across the district. I stood up and grabbed my keys from the hook near the door. The metal ring clinked softly in my hand. Before leaving, I looked once more at the radio. The blue screen glowed steadily in the dark office. For a moment I considered taking the logbook with me, reading more entries during the night. Instead, I left it on the desk. Some things made more sense when experienced directly. And the forest outside still had several hours left before morning. The night air felt colder when I stepped back outside. My breath showed faintly under the yard lights as I crossed the gravel toward the truck. Pine trees stood tall beyond the fence. Their tops moved slowly in the wind, but the ground level remained still. I climbed into the cab and closed the door. The familiar thud settled around me. The heater came alive again with a soft push of warm air. The radio sat where I had left it beside the gear's shift. I picked it up and checked the battery level. Full charge. Dispatch had not called in several minutes. The quiet line meant nothing unusual was happening across the district. Still, I remembered the note in the logbook. Radio not used. I turned the volume down slightly before starting the engine. The truck rolled out of the yard and onto the narrow access road that led back into the forest. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. The headlights caught drifting dust in the cold air. Small particles moved through the beams like pale snow. The road passed beneath a row of tall fir trees before reaching the main patrol route. Their branches leaned over the road and brushed each other in the wind. The sound was gentle and steady, comforting in a way. I drove a mile before hearing the radio click. A voice came through the speaker. Calm and familiar. Unit 12, check your location. I lifted the radio. North Loop Road near marker 15. A short pause followed. Then Ranger Dalton answered. Copy that. Just keep your chatter light tonight. His tone stayed casual. Almost boring. Why's that? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. The truck moved past a break in the trees where the moonlight touched the road. The pale light made the dirt surface shine faintly ahead of me. Dalton finally spoke again. Sound carries farther at night, he said. I waited for more explanation, but none came. He cleared his throat. Just don't fill the air unless you need to. The line clicked quietly. I lowered the radio slowly. His words sounded like normal advice. Important. Almost reassuring. Because if that small electronic noise existed, the world inside the truck never felt completely silent. And after reading the reports in the logbook, I began to realize something about that rule. The silence in the forest was not just the absence of sound. It was something larger. Something that replaced sound. And the last thing I wanted was to hear that change happen through the open air around my patrol truck. The maintenance yard sat near the north end of the district. It was a small clearing cut into the trees where extra equipment stayed locked behind a chain fence. Old trail signs leaned against one wall. A stack of wooden posts waited near the gate for future repairs. I drove in slowly. The headlights spread across the gravel lot and stopped at the fence line. That was when I saw the deer. It stood just beyond the chain link. A young buck. Thin legs. Narrow shoulders. Its coat looked pale under the truck lights. The animal faced the trees behind it. Completely still. At first I thought the headlights had frozen it. Deer often paused like that when a vehicle approached. But something about this one felt different. Its head did not move. Its ears stayed forward. Even its breathing looked absent. The truck engine idled softly while I watched. Warm air moved through the cab vents and brushed my hands on the steering wheel. Outside, the deer remained fixed in place. The forest behind it stretched dark and deep beyond the fence. Pine trunks formed narrow vertical lines between patches of shadow. I opened the truck door slowly. The metal hinge creaked once. Normally that sound would send a deer running. But this one did not react. Its body held the same exact position. The gravel crunched under my boot when I stepped down. The noise sounded louder than it should have. Still, the animal did not move. I walked a few steps closer to the fence. The cold air touched my face. The smell of damp soil drifted across the clearing. Somewhere far away, a branch snapped in the forest. The deer's eyes stayed locked on the tree line. I followed its gaze. At first I saw nothing. Just darkness between the trunks. The same quiet forest I had been driving through all night. But the animal remained frozen. Not tense. Not ready to bolt. Just waiting. I leaned one hand against the fence. The metal links felt cold and solid beneath my palm. "Easy," I said softly. My voice sounded small in the open clearing. The deer's ear twitched once. Then its head turned slightly toward me. For the first time I saw movement in its body. Muscles shifting beneath the thin coat. The moment lasted less than a second. Then the deer sprang away. It bounded into the trees with sudden speed. Hooves struck the ground hard and vanished into the darkness beyond the fence. The clearing fell quiet again. I stood there for a moment listening. Wind moved through the high branches. The usual forest noise returned without hesitation. Nothing about the woods seemed unusual now. Still, the image of the deer stayed in my mind. The way it had stood there without moving. The way it had stared into the trees like it was waiting for something. I walked back to the truck and climbed into the cab. The heater warmed my hands again as I closed the door. For a moment I looked toward the place where the deer had been standing. The forest beyond the fence remained dark and calm. But something about that moment bothered me more than I expected. Animals understood forests better than people ever could. And that deer had not been watching me. It had been watching the trees, waiting for something inside them to happen. The call came just after 1 in the morning. I had just finished circling the north maintenance yard and was heading back toward the loop road when the radio cracked open with a sharp burst of static. "Unit 12 respond." Dispatch sounded calm but alert. I lifted the radio from the console. "Go ahead." A second of quiet passed. Papers shuffled faintly in the background of the station office. "Possible overdue hiker reported on Ridge Spur Trail. Vehicles still parked at trailhead. No contact for several hours." I glanced toward the road ahead. The dark trees stretched out like walls along both sides of the dirt track. "How long overdue?" I asked. "Last confirmed sighting around sunset." That meant 6 hours at least. Not unusual in these woods. People misjudge distances all the time. A wrong turn in the dark could leave someone walking in circles for hours. Still, the word overdue always tightened something in my chest. "I'm 10 minutes out," I said. "Copy that." The radio clicked silent again. I set it back beside the gears shift and turned the truck toward the ridge road. The tires rolled over loose gravel before settling into the packed dirt trail. The forest sounded alive as usual. Crickets filled the roadside grass. Wind brushed through the tops of the tall pines. Somewhere far off an owl gave a slow call. Normal night sounds. The headlights pushed forward through the trees while the truck climbed gradually uphill. Ridge Spur Trail branched off near Marker 16, a narrow path that hikers used during the day to reach an overlook above the valley. At night the place stayed empty. When I reached the trailhead parking area, one vehicle sat alone beneath the trees. A small sedan. Its windshield reflected my headlights in a dull glow. I parked beside it and shut off the engine. The forest noise flowed in immediately through the open window. Crickets. Wind. Leaves shifting softly along the ground. I stepped out of the truck and stretched my legs. Cold air settled around me. The smell of pine needles and damp soil drifted through the clearing. The sedan looked untouched. No broken glass. No sign of struggle. Just a car waiting quietly beneath the trees. I walked over and shined my flashlight through the window. Backpack on the passenger seat. Water bottle in the cup holder. Everything looked ordinary. I turned toward the trail entrance. The narrow path disappeared between tall trunks only a few yards away. My flashlight beam followed the ground where dirt and roots twisted into the darkness. "Hiker call," I said into the forest. My voice carried a short distance before fading. Usually someone would answer. A shout. Footsteps. Something. But the trail stayed still. I tried again. "Park ranger. Call out if you can hear me." The beam of my flashlight moved deeper into the trees. Still nothing. Just the steady background noise of the forest breathing around me. I hesitated for a moment. Then I stepped onto the trail and started walking. At first the woods sounded normal. Wind moving high above. Insects working in the grass. The ground beneath my boots gave a soft crunch with every step. But about 50 yards into the trail something changed. It began the same way it had near the creek earlier that night. The crickets stopped first. Their sound faded slowly like a radio losing signal. I stopped walking. The wind followed a moment later. The branches above the trail went still. Within seconds the forest had gone quiet. Not calm. Not peaceful. Just empty. I stood there in the middle of the trail with my flashlight pointed forward and remembered the rule written on that sheet of paper. If the forest goes silent, leave. My heart beat louder than the woods around me. For a moment I thought about calling dispatch. But another line from the station reports surfaced in my mind. Radio not used. The silence pressed against the trees and against my ears. And somewhere in that quiet darkness ahead of me the missing hiker was supposed to be waiting. I stood on the trail for several seconds without moving. The silence did not feel like normal quiet. It had weight to it. A thick pressure that settled into the space between the trees. My flashlight beam stretched forward along the narrow path. Roots twisted across the ground like dark veins. Pine needles covered everything in a soft layer that should have made small sounds under my boots. But the forest did not answer. No insects. No wind. No distant animals shifting through the brush. Even the creek somewhere down the slope had vanished from hearing. The absence made my ears ache slightly. I took a slow breath through my nose. Cold air filled my lungs. My pulse sounded louder than the woods around me. Training told me to keep moving. Find the hiker. Complete the search. But the rule from the station repeated in my mind. If the forest goes silent, leave. I shifted my weight and took one careful step backward along the trail. The pine needles crushed softly beneath my boot. The sound felt sharp and out of place in the still air. I stopped again. Nothing changed. The silence stayed complete. My flashlight flickered across the trunks of several tall pines ahead. Their bark looked pale in the beam. The forest floor between them held only shadow. For a moment I wondered if the hiker might be standing somewhere just beyond the light. Watching. Waiting to call out. The thought made the darkness feel closer. I turned slowly and started back toward the trailhead. Each step felt louder than it should have. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. The silence followed me down the path like something walking a few feet behind my back. I resisted the urge to look over my shoulder. When the truck headlights finally came into view through the trees, my shoulders relaxed slightly. The vehicle sat where I had left it beside the sedan. Its metal surface reflected the faint glow of my flashlight. Another step brought me to the edge of the clearing. Still no sound from the forest. I reached the truck door and opened it. The hinge creaked faintly. For a moment the noise seemed enormous. I climbed inside and shut the door quickly. The cab closed around me. Warm air from the heater brushed my legs again. The dashboard lights glowed their familiar soft green. The world inside the truck felt normal. Outside the windshield the forest remained silent. I started the engine. The low rumble filled the cab with mechanical noise. It felt almost comforting after the emptiness of the woods. I glanced toward the trail entrance one last time. My flashlight beam still rested against the dirt path where I had dropped it beside the truck tire. The beam pointed directly into the trees. And in that perfect silence the light showed something I had not noticed before. Footprints in the trail dirt. Fresh ones. Leading deeper into the forest. But beside them was another set. Identical in shape and spacing. Both paths moving away from the clearing. Both disappearing into the silent trees ahead. For a few seconds I just sat there with the engine running. The heater pushed warm air through the cab. The dashboard lights glowed steady. The truck felt safe in the way solid machines often do. But outside the windshield the forest stayed completely silent. My flashlight still pointed down the trail. Its beam held the footprints in clear view. 2 sets. Same size. Same distance between steps. If I had not known better I would have thought the same person had walked the path twice. I leaned forward slightly. The dirt looked soft enough to show detail. Each tread pattern matched perfectly. Even the small notch in the sole that my boot had worn down over time appeared in both sets of prints. One pair I understood. Mine. The other I did not. They walked beside each other for several yards before fading into the darkness beyond the flashlight beam. The silence outside pressed against the truck windows. I reached slowly for the radio. Dalton had told me to keep chatter light. Ellis had warned me not to use it if the forest went quiet. But there was a missing hiker somewhere in those trees. Dispatch needed to know. My thumb rested on the push button. The small device felt warm from the truck heater. For a moment I listened. Nothing moved outside. No wind. No insects. Just the steady engine vibrates beneath the cab floor. I pressed the button. Unit 12 to dispatch. My voice sounded louder than usual inside the truck. The radio speaker crackled softly. A burst of static answered back. I waited. Then I tapped the microphone again. Dispatch, do you copy? The silence outside deepened. The radio speaker clicked once. Not a voice. Just a soft mechanical sound. Then another click followed. 3 short taps through the speaker. I frowned and leaned closer to the device. The pattern repeated exactly. 3 taps. A short pause. 3 taps again. My hand was frozen around the radio. The sound did not resemble radio interference. It had rhythm. Intent. I tapped the microphone lightly with my finger. 1 small knock. The speaker answered immediately. Click. My stomach tightened. I tried another tap. 2 quick knocks against the plastic. The speaker responded again. 2 clicks. Perfectly matched. The silence outside seemed to thicken around the truck while the pattern continued through the radio. Not voices. Not words. Just something repeating whatever signal I sent into the air. My mouth felt dry. Very slowly I released the push button and placed the radio back in the console. The speaker went quiet. But the forest outside remained completely still. No wind touched the branches. No insect sound returned. The noise felt heavier now that the radio had answered. Like the silence had been listening to the entire time. A memory surfaced from the station briefing. Ellis standing by the door. If it happens, don't use the radio. I looked again toward the trail. The 2 sets of footprints still waited in the dirt. One set belonged to me. The other walked beside it deeper into the woods. The silence outside the truck did not move. It did not fade. It simply remained. And in that moment, I understood something that had not been written in the rules sheet. The forest did not just go silent. Something inside that silence responded when it heard you. The engine stayed running while I pulled the truck slowly away from the trailhead. Gravel crunched under the tires as the vehicle turned around in the clearing. The silence followed for several seconds. Even with the engine noise filling the cab, the forest outside looked wrong. The trees stood too still. The air felt heavy against the windshield. Then as the truck rolled back onto the main road, the sound returned. First the wind touched the branches again. Then a single cricket started somewhere in the grass beside the ditch. Within another few seconds the entire forest seemed to breathe back into life. Insects resumed their steady rhythm. An owl called once from the ridge above the road. The world sounded normal again. I kept driving. My hands stayed tight on the wheel while the patrol road carried the truck downhill toward the station. The heater hummed against my boots. The radio sat silent beside the gear shift. I did not touch it again. By the time the station lights appeared through the trees, the forest sounded exactly the way it had earlier that night. Alive. Balanced. Almost peaceful. Inside the office the warmth hit me immediately. The heater rattled softly in the corner, while the overhead lights buzzed faintly above the desks. Dalton sat near the radio console filling out paperwork. He looked up when I walked in. "Find the hiker?" I shook my head. Trail was empty. He waited a moment. "You didn't go far?" "Far enough." Dalton studied my face for a second but did not press the question. He turned back to his paperwork and scribbled something into the log sheet. I filled out my own report at the next desk. The pen felt strange in my hand. My thoughts kept circling the moment on the trail. The silence. The footprints. The sound answering through the radio. But none of that fit easily into the report form. So I wrote the facts that could be explained. Responded to overdue hiker call. Trailhead vehicle located. Search delayed due to environmental conditions. Area cleared. Return to station. Simple sentences. Clean and professional. When I finished, I placed the paper on the desk beside Dalton. He glanced at it briefly. "Fair enough," he said. Neither of us mentioned the silence. The office felt calm again. The heater moved warm air across the room. The radio gave a soft burst of static from the shelf. After a few minutes the station phone rang. Dalton answered. A short conversation followed. Then he hung up and looked over at me. "Hiker showed up," he said. "Back at the trailhead. Lost the path for a while." I nodded. "That happens." Dalton hesitated. "He say anything strange?" "Not really," Dalton replied. He paused before adding the last part. "Just said the woods got quiet for a bit." The heater clicked on again. Warm air filled the room while neither of us spoke. A few seconds later Dalton turned back to his paperwork. I looked toward the radio on the shelf. The speaker remained still. But for the rest of the night one thought stayed with me. The forest had answered my signal. And whatever had answered had done it perfectly. As if it had been waiting for someone to speak first. After that night my patrol routine changed in small ways. Nothing dramatic. No sudden fear. Just quiet adjustments that made the work feel steadier. I began bringing stronger coffee on every patrol. The thermos stayed in the cup holder beside the gear shift. The heat helped during long drives when the forest pressed close around the road. Before leaving the station I checked the same items in the same order. Flashlight. Compass. Whistle. Map. Radio. Touching each object gave the night a simple structure. The routine helped the mind stay calm. Small tools made the dark feel manageable. The truck door became part of that habit too. I always closed it the same way. One pull on the handle. One solid latch. The heavy metal sound echoed inside the cab. That sound mattered more than I expected. When the door shut, the outside world stayed outside. The heater pushed warm air toward my boots while the dashboard lights glowed soft green across the gauges. The radio rested beside the console. I kept the volume a little higher now. Not loud. Just enough so the steady hiss never disappeared. That small electronic noise filled the cab like quiet breathing. On longer patrol loops I started counting the mile markers. 10. 11. 12. Each number confirmed the road was still where it should be. The forest stretched wide beyond the headlights, but the gravel stayed steady beneath the tires. Most nights passed without anything unusual. Crickets worked the roadside grass. Owls called from distant branches. Wind moved through the tall pines and carried a slow whisper down toward the road. Those sounds rebuilt the comfort I had felt during my first week in the district. Almost. Sometimes a stretch of road would feel too empty. A patch of trees would hold still for a moment longer than normal. During those times my hand drifted toward the radio without thinking. I never pressed the button. Not after the way the speaker had answered me that night. Instead, I let the truck engine fill the cab with its low mechanical hum. Metal and fuel made dependable noise. Machines followed ordinary rules. Weeks passed like that. The patrol road stayed quiet but manageable. The forest behaved mostly the way it always had. But my listening changed. Whenever I stepped out of the truck, I paused first. I listened. Wind against needles. Insects moving through grass. A distant animal somewhere in the dark. Those sounds told me the forest was alive. And as long as the forest stayed alive, the night felt safe enough to work. But once you have heard the woods go completely silent, the memory never leaves. It stays in the back of your mind like a shadow. Because the silence is not just the absence of sound. It feels like something entering the forest. And asking everything else to stop. After a few weeks I started noticing something about the silence. It did not always arrive suddenly. At first I believed the forest simply stopped all at once. Like a switch being flipped somewhere deep in the trees. But that was not always how it happened. Sometimes the change moved slowly. You would be driving along a familiar stretch of road with the windows slightly open. Crickets working the grass. Wind brushing the tops of the pines. Tires moving over gravel with a steady rhythm. Everything normal. Then one layer of sound would fade. The insects might stop first. You would not notice it immediately. The change was small enough that the rest of the forest noise still filled the air. Whined through the trees. A distant owl somewhere across the valley. The truck engine humming quietly. But after another minute the wind would drop too. The branches would hold still above the road. The soft whisper of needles would disappear. Now the forest would feel thinner. Not silent yet. Just missing something. The first time I noticed this happening, I slowed the truck and rolled the window down a little farther. Cold air moved through the cab. I leaned slightly toward the opening and listened carefully. No insects. No wind. Only the low engine sound and the gravel beneath the tires. Then the owl stopped. The change was subtle, but it carried weight. The forest was not empty yet, but the distance between sounds had grown wider. Each noise stood alone instead of blending into the usual background. I pulled the truck to the side of the road and shut off the engine. The headlights remained on. Their beams stretched into the trees ahead. For a few seconds the forest held that thin layer of quiet. My hand rested near the radio, but I did not touch it. I knew better now. Then a single cricket started again somewhere near the ditch. A moment later another joined it. Wind returned slowly to the branches above the road. The forest rebuilt itself piece by piece. Sound layered back together until the night felt full again. I started the engine and continued driving. But after that moment I understood something important. The silence was not always the beginning of the problem. Sometimes it was the end of a process you had already missed. Each sound disappearing one by one until the forest reached a point where nothing remained. And when that point arrived, the quiet did not feel natural. It felt deliberate. Like the woods were clearing space for something. Over the next few nights I noticed those patterns more often. A patch of road where insects faded away first. A hillside where wind stopped moving through the branches. Most of the time the forest recovered before reaching full silence. But every time the change began, my body reacted the same way. Breath slowing. Hands tightening slightly on the wheel. Listening. Waiting to see if the last sound would disappear too. Because if it did, the rule from the station would become the only thing that mattered. Leave immediately. Do not investigate. Do not speak. Just drive until the forest remembered how to make noise again. The discovery happened just before sunrise on a patrol that should have been routine. The sky was beginning to pale behind the trees when I turned onto a narrow service road near marker 17. The forest held that quiet hour between night and morning when the wind slows and the first birds have not started yet. The road was damp from fog. My headlights stretched across the ground and caught something in the dirt ahead. Footprints. I slowed the truck and pulled to the side. At first the prints looked ordinary. Boot marks pressed clearly into the soft soil beside the road. The pattern was familiar. Too familiar. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward them. Cold morning air moved lightly through the trees. The smell of wet pine needles hung close to the ground. I looked down again. The tread pattern matched my own boots. The same worn edges. The same small notch in the heel. That detail made my stomach tighten. The prints moved away from the road and into the trees. For a moment I assumed I had walked there earlier during another patrol. Maybe checking a fallen branch or an animal track. But something about the spacing felt wrong. I followed the trail a few steps into the forest. The ground beneath the trees stayed soft enough to hold clear impressions. My flashlight was not needed now. The rising light showed the path easily. Then I saw the second set. Another line of footprints ran beside the first. Identical in size. Identical in shape. Each step placed perfectly beside the other like two people walking together in complete rhythm. Except I had never left the road that morning. I crouched down and studied the dirt more closely. Both sets of prints looked fresh. No leaves had fallen across them. No wind had softened their edges. They had been made recently. Very recently. My eyes followed the twin paths deeper into the forest. The two lines continued between the trees for several yards before curving slightly out of sight. I stood there for a long moment. The forest around me had begun to wake. A single bird called somewhere in the distance. Wind touched the branches above the road. Normal sounds. But the prints in the dirt told a different story. Two sets of my own footsteps moving into the woods. One pair belonged to me. The other had appeared without explanation. The rule came to me without effort. Not from the station briefing. Not from the logbook. Just a clear understanding that formed in my mind while I looked at those tracks. If you ever find two versions of your own path, you do not follow either of them. I stepped backwards slowly until I reached the edge of the road again. The truck waited beside the ditch with the engine idling softly. I climbed back into the cab and closed the door. For a moment I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and looked toward the place where the footprints disappeared between the trees. Morning light was growing stronger now. The forest looked almost peaceful. But I knew something about that path had not come from me. And whatever had walked beside those tracks knew exactly where I had been going. I brought up marker 17 the next afternoon. Day's shift had taken over the patrol routes. The station office felt brighter in daylight. Sunlight came through the front windows and touched the map wall beside the radio rack. Dalton stood near the coffee machine while Ranger Ellis leaned against the desk reading through a stack of trail permits. I kept my voice casual. "You ever notice anything strange near 17? Dalton looked up first. His expression stayed neutral, but he did not answer. Ellis lowered the papers slowly. "What kind of strange?" he asked. I shrugged. "Just asking. Road felt different this morning." The room went quiet for a moment. Not the same kind of silence as the forest, but close enough that I noticed it. Ellis walked over to the large district map on the wall. His finger traced the patrol road north of the station. He stopped at marker 17. "That stretch runs close to the old fire tower trail," he said. "I know the one. The tower had been built decades ago, when the district still used lookout stations to spot smoke during dry months. The structure remained, but it was rarely used now. Ellis studied the map a second longer. "I don't drive past this point after dark," he said. Dalton finally spoke from the coffee counter. "Neither do I." I looked between them. "Why?" Neither man answered right away. Ellis returned the trail permits to the desk and folded his arms. "The forest changes up there," he said. His voice carried the same calm tone he had used during my first week. No drama. Just simple certainty. "How?" I asked. He thought for a moment. "You ever feel like something is listening while you're walking?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes." Ellis nodded. "That area listens more than the rest." Dalton took a sip of coffee but kept his eyes on the map. Ellis continued. "Back when the tower was active, rangers used to spend nights up there during fire season. One of them wrote something in the old logbook." "What did it say?" Ellis tapped the map once. "During the silence, the tower hears you breathing." I waited for the rest of the explanation. None came. "The tower?" I said. "It sits higher than the trees," Ellis replied. "Sound travels differently up there." Dalton set his mug down. "First time I heard the woods go quiet was near that marker," he said quietly. I watched him. "What happened?" "Nothing," he answered. "That's the problem." Ellis picked up his jacket from the chair. "There's another rule people learn eventually," he said. "What rule?" He walked toward the door before answering. "When the forest goes silent, keep your mouth closed." I frowned. "Why?" Ellis paused with his hand on the door handle. "Because breathing makes noise." The door opened and warm daylight spilled across the floor. Before stepping outside, he added one last sentence. "And noise draws attention." The assignment came 3 nights later. A storm had moved through the district earlier that afternoon. Nothing severe. Just steady rain and a few long stretches of wind that pushed through the higher ridges. By evening the clouds had broken apart, and the forest looked calm again. But the storm had knocked out the radio repeater mounted near the old fire tower. Without that relay, the northern patrol roads lost clear communication with the station. Dalton handed me the work order while I stood beside the truck in the yard. "Should be simple," he said. I read the note. "Check repeater power. Reset unit if needed. Routine maintenance." Still, the location made me pause. The tower stood above marker 17. Dalton noticed my expression. "You'll be fine," he said. His voice sounded normal. Calm. But he did not meet my eyes when he said it. I loaded a small tool kit into the passenger seat. Extra batteries. Hand lantern. Spare radio pack. The sky above the station had turned deep blue as night settled over the trees. A few stars appeared through the clearing clouds. The air smelled clean after the rain. I started the truck and rolled out of the yard. The patrol road climbed slowly toward the northern ridge. Water from the earlier storm still dripped from branches overhead. The tires pushed through small patches of mud where the rain had softened the ground. The forest sounded full again. Crickets worked the grass along the roadside. Wind brushed gently through the tall pines. Somewhere farther uphill, an owl called once and then again. Normal night sounds. For a moment the job felt like any other patrol. Just another road. Another piece of equipment needing attention. The headlights followed the curve toward marker 16. My hand stayed steady on the wheel while the truck climbed the slope. The heater hummed quietly. The radio rested beside the gear's shift, giving its soft background hiss. Then marker 17 appeared beside the road. The wooden post leaned slightly where the soil had shifted over time. Its white number reflected the headlights for a moment before sliding past the driver's window. I kept driving. The road beyond the marker narrowed and began to climb more sharply. The trees grew taller here. Their trunks stood close together along the shoulder. A narrow trail sign appeared ahead. Fire tower access. I turned onto the path. The tires rolled slowly across wet dirt and scattered pine needles. The trail wound upward between thick stands of trees until the structure came into view. The fire tower rose above the forest like a thin metal skeleton. Four long legs anchored it to the ground while a narrow staircase climbed toward the small observation cabin at the top. The storm clouds had cleared enough for moonlight to touch the upper rails. The structure looked pale against the dark sky. I parked the truck at the base of the tower. The engine idled for a moment before I shut it off. Night sounds flowed through the clearing again. Wind. Insects. A distant owl somewhere beyond the ridge. Everything seemed ordinary. I grabbed the tool kit and stepped out of the truck. Cold air touched my face as I walked toward the metal staircase. The tower creaked faintly in the breeze. The sound reminded me of an old ship shifting on calm water. I placed one boot on the first step. The metal felt cool beneath the sole. The climb looked simple enough. Just a straight path upward through the open air. I started to ascend. At that moment the forest below still sounded completely alive. The first part of the climb felt ordinary. Metal steps rang softly beneath my boots. Each footfall carried a small hollow sound that echoed through the tower frame. The wind moved gently through the trees below and brushed against the rails beside me. I climbed slowly, one hand on the cold metal railing, the tool bag hanging from my shoulder. From halfway up the staircase, the forest looked wider. The tree line stretched outward in every direction like a dark ocean of needles and branches. Night sounds continued below. Crickets. Wind. The distant call of an owl somewhere down the ridge. Then the crickets stopped. The change happened so quickly that I missed the moment itself. 1 second the grass below the tower held a steady rhythm of insect noise. The next second it was gone. I paused on the step. My boot rested against the metal rung while my hand tightened slightly around the railing. The wind still moved through the trees for a few seconds longer. Branches shifted gently across one another in the darkness. Then that sound faded too. The tower creaked once. A long, slow movement through the metal frame. After that the structure went still. I stood there halfway between the ground and the observation cabin with the forest spread beneath me. The silence felt stronger at that height. On the ground a person could still imagine distant sounds hiding behind the trees. Up on the tower there was nothing to hide behind. The absence spread across the entire valley. No insects. No wind. No animals moving in the brush. Just the faint sound of my own breathing. I remembered Ellis standing by the station door. If the forest goes silent, leave. My eyes moved downward along the staircase. The truck sat in the clearing below. Its metal roof reflected a small patch of moonlight. I could climb down in less than a minute. The rule had been clear. Leave immediately. But the repeater unit waited above me in the tower cabin. Without it the North Patrol road stayed blind to radio calls. The missing hiker report from a few nights earlier passed through my mind. People still use these trails. Someone might need help. I stayed where I was for another moment. The metal railing beneath my hand felt colder now. The still air made the night feel thicker around my face. My breath sounded louder than it should have. Ellis had said something else during our conversation. When the forest goes silent, keep your mouth closed. Breathing makes noise. The thought returned without warning. I slowly closed my lips and breathed through my nose instead. The silence did not react. It remained complete. My heart beat steadily in my chest. The rhythm sounded too loud against the emptiness around the tower. I looked up toward the observation cabin. The small wooden structure waited above me. Its windows reflected faint moonlight across the glass. The repeater box sat inside that room. Just another piece of equipment. Just another simple task. But the silence below the tower had not broken yet. And standing on those stairs I began to understand something unsettling. The quiet had not appeared everywhere at once. It had begun down in the trees. And it was slowly rising upward through the tower toward where I stood. I continued climbing. Each step felt deliberate. The metal rungs held the weight of my boots with a soft, hollow sound. Normally the tower would answer that noise with small echoes through the frame. Now the sound faded almost immediately. The silence around the structure seemed to absorb it. By the time I reached the top platform, my breathing had slowed. I kept my mouth closed like Ellis had said. Air moved quietly through my nose while the cool night pressed against my face. The observation cabin stood directly ahead. A small wooden room raised above the staircase with windows on every side. The door hung slightly open from the earlier storm. I pushed it gently. The hinge moved with a faint dry sound. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of old wood and dust. Moonlight slipped through the windows and painted pale squares across the floorboards. The repeater unit rested on a narrow desk against the far wall. A small metal box with cables running through the boards toward the tower frame. Simple equipment. I stepped inside. The floor creaked under my weight. The sound felt too loud in the still room. For a moment I just stood there listening. The silence had followed me up the tower. No wind touched the windows. No insects worked the grass below. The valley beyond the glass looked frozen in place. Then I noticed the marks on the walls. At first they looked like scratches in the wood. But when I moved closer I saw that they were carved letters. Dozens of them cut into the cabin boards by someone with a knife. Short messages. Small warnings. Some were faded with age. Some looked newer. I ran the beam of my lantern across the wall and read a few of them. Do not speak, wait for sound, leave before it reaches the stairs. The words had been carved by different hands over many years. Each message carried the same quiet urgency. The repeater unit gave a faint electrical hum on the desk beside me. I knelt down and opened the panel. A loose wire from the storm had knocked the unit offline. The repair would take less than a minute. While I worked, my eyes drifted back toward the carved messages on the wall. One line had been cut deeper than the others. It sat just beside the window facing the valley. The tower listens first. I finished tightening the wire and closed the panel. The repeater hummed softly as power returned to the system. At that exact moment something touched the bottom of the tower. The sound came from directly beneath the cabin floor. A single knock. Not loud. Just one clear tap against the metal frame below. My hands froze on the desk. The silence outside the windows did not move. Another knock followed. The same steady sound. As if something below the tower had reached up and tested the structure. I stood slowly. The floor beneath my boots felt thin now. Only a few wooden boards separated the cabin from the metal frame beneath. The silence outside remained complete. Then the tower answered the knock. A long, slow vibration moved through the metal legs below. The structure had begun to feel the sound too. I did not look through the floorboards. The knock beneath the cabin stayed in my head like an echo, but I forced my attention toward the staircase outside the door. The rule was simple. Leave. No questions. No investigation. I picked up the lantern and turned it off. Darkness filled the cabin immediately. Only a faint line of moonlight remained through the windows. The repeater unit hummed softly on the desk behind me. I stepped out onto the platform. The metal frame of the tower felt colder now. My hand closed around the railing while I placed my boot carefully on the first step down. The staircase stretched below me in a long, narrow line. Halfway down the tower, the trees began again. Dark shapes rising from the forest floor like pillars. Everything remained silent. I moved slowly. Each step carried a small hollow sound through the metal frame, but the noise seemed to disappear before it reached the trees. My breathing stayed quiet through my nose. No wind touched the tower. No insects returned to the grass below. Just the faint hum of the repeater above and the steady rhythm of my boots on the stairs. Step. Pause. Step. The forest did not react. Halfway down the staircase, my hand tightened slightly on the railing. Something had changed. A single sound reached the tower from somewhere below. A bird call. Short. Sharp. Too close. It came from directly beneath the structure. The noise felt wrong. Not the presence of a bird. Just the sound of one. The call repeated once more. Then the silence swallowed it. I kept descending. Do not speak. Do not stop. The carved messages on the cabin wall stayed clear in my mind while I moved down the steps. Leave before it reaches the stairs. The truck waited in the clearing below. Its metal roof reflected a dull stripe of moonlight. I reached the last section of stairs and stepped onto the ground. The forest around the tower still held that complete emptiness. I walked quickly toward the truck. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, but the sound felt thin against the silent trees. When I reached the driver's door, I stopped. The handle hung slightly away from the frame. The door was not fully closed. I was certain I had shut it before climbing the tower. The small gap between the door and the cab looked dark inside. For a moment I stood there listening. Nothing moved in the forest. No wind. No insects. The silence held steady around the clearing. I reached out and pulled the door closed. The latch clicked with a heavy metal sound. That noise broke the silence. Wind returned first. The tops of the trees began to move again above the tower. A cricket started somewhere in the grass. Then another joined it. Within seconds the forest rebuilt its normal voice. Branches whispered in the night air. Insects filled the ground with steady rhythm. The valley breathed again. I stood beside the truck for a moment before climbing inside. The heater started its slow warm hum. The radio gave a soft burst of static as the repeater connection returned. Everything sounded normal. But while I started the engine and turned the truck toward the road, one thought stayed with me. Something had touched the tower. And whatever it was had stopped knocking the moment my feet reached the ground. Morning arrived slowly over the district. By the time I returned to the station, the sky had begun to lighten behind the trees. The forest looked ordinary again. Pine trunks stood quiet in the gray light. A few birds had started calling from the branches near the road. Nothing about the landscape suggested anything unusual had happened during the night. The station yard felt calm when I parked the truck. Dalton's vehicle already sat near the office door. The gravel still held small puddles from the storm earlier in the day. Inside the building, the heater hummed gently while the smell of coffee filled the room. Dalton looked up from the desk when I entered. "You get the repeater running?" "Yes." He nodded and slid a report form across the desk. "Just write it up." I sat down and picked up the pen. The form looked simple enough. Location. Equipment condition. Repair details. Time completed. Normal administrative language. But when I tried to describe the night, my thoughts kept drifting back to the tower. The silence. The carved messages on the wall. The knock beneath the cabin floor. None of those things fit anywhere on the report sheet. So I wrote what could be explained. Storm damage to repeater wiring. Connection restored. Tower structure stable. Routine inspection completed. The sentences looked clean and reasonable on the page. Dalton glanced over the form when I finished. "Good," he said. He clipped the paper to a stack of other reports without asking anything else. That part of the job always surprised new rangers. You expected questions, follow-up, details. But most of the time people in the district already understood what certain reports meant without needing to say it out loud. I stood up and walked toward the coffee machine. The office radio crackled softly on the shelf behind the desk. Dispatch spoke with another ranger somewhere south of the river. Normal voices. Normal communication. The room felt comfortable again. Warm air. Paperwork. Morning light touching the windows. Still, I noticed something about the way Dalton moved around the room. He kept the radio volume slightly higher than usual. The background hiss filled the office like a quiet presence. I poured a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. Dalton looked up briefly. "Everything quiet up there?" he asked. I thought about the tower. The silence climbing the stairs. The knock beneath the cabin floor. "Yeah," I said. He nodded once. That was the end of the conversation. The report stayed on the desk with the rest of the paperwork. Clean sentences. Simple explanations. Nothing in that document mentioned the silence or the sound beneath the tower. But anyone who read it later would understand the truth anyway. Because sometimes the most important details in a ranger report are the ones that never get written down. After the tower night, I started paying attention to sound in a different way. The change followed me outside the forest. At first, I only noticed it during patrol. I would sit in the truck at a trailhead and listen carefully before stepping out. Crickets, wind, a distant bird. If the forest held those sounds, I felt steady enough to work. But the habit did not stay on the patrol roads. It followed me home. My cabin sat on the edge of town near the river. A small place with thin walls and an old heater that rattled every time it started. The first night after the tower assignment, I woke up around 2 in the morning. The room felt too still. For a moment I lay there listening. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the kitchen. Water moved through the pipes somewhere in the wall. Normal house sounds. Still my body stayed tense. I got up and walked through the house. The wooden floor creaked beneath my steps. The small lamp near the couch cast a warm circle of light across the living room. Everything looked ordinary. But I noticed something strange. The house felt safer when it made noise. I started leaving the kitchen fan on at night. Sometimes I ran the bathroom faucet for a minute before going to bed just to hear water moving through the pipes. Those sounds kept the rooms from feeling empty. The rule had followed me home without my noticing. If the world ever went silent, leave. I placed my keys on the hook beside the door every night. Boots stayed lined up beneath the coat rack. Phone charged on the table near the couch. Small anchor points. Exit paths. Just in case. Most nights passed without anything unusual. Cars moved along the distant highway. The river carried its slow, steady sound through the trees behind the cabin. Those noises reminded me that life continued beyond the forest. Still, there were moments when the quiet in town felt wrong. Late at night, traffic would fade. The wind would settle. For a few seconds, the air outside the cabin would grow still. During those moments, I caught myself holding my breath. Waiting. Listening. The silence never lasted long. A truck would pass on the highway. A dog would bark somewhere down the road. Sound returned and the tension slipped away. But the habit stayed. Once you learn to measure safety by sound, the absence of it becomes impossible to ignore. The forest had taught me that lesson. And the tower had proven something else. Silence does not always stay where you first hear it. Sometimes it travels with you. Quietly. Patiently. Waiting for a place where the world forgets to make noise. The first time it happened in town, I was leaving the grocery store. It was early evening. Not late enough for the streets to be empty. Cars moved slowly through the parking lot while people carried bags toward their vehicles. Normal noise surrounded the place. Engines idling. Shopping carts rolling over pavement. Voices drifting across the lot. I stepped through the sliding doors with a bag in one hand and walked toward my truck. Halfway across the parking lot, the sound disappeared. Not faded. Stopped. The engines around me seemed to pause mid-hum. The distant traffic from the highway vanished. Even the faint buzz from the store lights above the entrance disappeared. I stopped walking. For 2 seconds, the entire lot held that same heavy silence I had heard in the forest. The same pressure. The same empty space where sound should have been. People continued moving around me. A woman pushed a cart toward her car. A man opened his truck door and climbed inside. None of them reacted. To them, the moment had not happened. Then the noise returned. Engines started again. A cart rattled across the pavement. Someone laughed near the store entrance. The world resumed its normal rhythm as if nothing had changed. I stood there for a moment with the grocery bag hanging from my hand. My chest felt tight. The forest had been miles away. Yet the silence had found me again. I walked the rest of the way to my truck and set the bag on the passenger seat. The parking lot lights reflected across the windshield while cars moved through the lanes around me. Everything looked ordinary. Still, I sat there for a minute before starting the engine. Listening. The traffic noise stayed steady. A truck passed along the road beyond the lot. Somewhere nearby, a car alarm chirped once before going quiet again. Normal sounds. But the memory of those 2 silent seconds remained sharp in my mind. The forest had taught me what that kind of silence meant. And the fact that it could appear in the middle of a busy parking lot made one thing painfully clear. The rule about leaving when the forest goes silent had never really been about the forest. It had always been about recognizing the moment when the world stops making noise. Because wherever that silence appears, something else is already there. I still work the same district. Most nights the forest behaves exactly the way a forest should. Wind moves through the pines. Insects work the grass beside the road. Owls call across the ridges while the truck rolls through the dark. Those sounds keep the job simple. When the forest speaks the way it is supposed to, you can trust the night. I follow the rule every time now. The moment the woods begin to empty, I turn the truck around. No hesitation. No investigation. The patrol report can always be written later. People sometimes ask why rangers leave certain areas without finishing a search. The answer is never written in detail. Environmental conditions. Unsafe terrain. Limited visibility. Clean phrases that make sense on paper. But the real reason stays between the people who have heard the silence before. Because the silence does not harm you immediately. That would be easier to understand. Instead, it changes something inside your thinking. When the forest stops making sound, your mind begins to drift with it. Decisions feel slower. The world loses its normal shape. That is when mistakes happen. And mistakes in the dark woods can become permanent. So I leave. Every time. Some nights I sit in the truck after driving away and wait for the insects to start again somewhere along the road. That first small sound always feels important. Proof that the forest has remembered how to breathe. Proof that the night has returned to its normal balance. But even now there are moments when the silence appears without warning. A stretch of road with no insects. A patch of trees where the wind suddenly dies. When that happens, my hands tighten on the wheel and I listen very carefully. Because the rule only tells you when to leave. It never explains what the silence actually is. The older rangers never talk about that part. They only follow the same habit I do. Drive until the forest makes noise again. Then continue the patrol like nothing happened. The job continues that way year after year. Miles of road. Trees on both sides. Sound moving through the dark. And sometimes when the night is very still, I remember the tower. The carved messages on the wall. The knock beneath the floor. Whatever touched the metal legs of that structure knew I was above it. It waited until I climbed down. Then it stopped. I do not know what lives inside the silence. I only know one thing for certain. As long as the forest keeps making noise, I am still human enough to leave it behind.